Where were you before you were born? A Buddhist reflection. Have you ever looked up at a star-filled sky and felt something? A kind of homesickness for a place you've never been. A quiet, haunting question rising from the stillness of your heart. Where did I come from? Really, where was I before all this? Not your childhood home, not your mother's womb, but something deeper, before the name, before the face, before memory. If that question has ever crossed your mind, even once, you're not alone. In fact, you've just touched one of the oldest questions humanity has ever asked. Across time and cultures, this inquiry echoes. From ancient caves to modern classrooms, monks in silence to children lost in thought, somewhere, someone has always been asking, who was I before I was born? This question isn't trendy. It isn't new. It's not just for spiritual seekers or philosophers. It's a deep human instinct, almost like a memory we can't quite access, yet feel it pulsing just beneath the surface of our lives. Have you ever stood in a quiet room and felt a strange familiarity with the moment, like you've lived it before? Or met someone for the first time, but felt as if you've known them forever? These aren't just poetic moments. They may be glimpses of something deeper. In the teachings of the Buddha, this question, where did I come from, was not brushed aside. It was central to his spiritual awakening. After years of meditation and deep insight, the Buddha described a powerful realization. He said, "Through countless births I wandered, seeking, but not finding, the builder of this house." He wasn't talking about a physical house. He meant the house of personal identity, the cycle of birth and death that we're all caught in. And the builder of this house? It wasn't a god, not some external creator. It was something more intimate, more subtle, and more dangerous. Craving and ignorance. Craving for pleasure, for identity, for permanence. Ignorance of the way things truly are. These two forces in Buddhist thought are the architects of our existence. They're what keep the cycle of samsara, the endless turning of birth, death, and rebirth, spinning. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The Buddha's insight wasn't to answer the question, where did we begin, with a simple origin story. He didn't point to a first cause, a divine spark, or a single moment of creation. Instead, he did something radical. He stayed silent. That silence wasn't avoidance, it was wisdom. He said some questions, like what is north of the North Pole, don't lead us to freedom. They bind us in mental circles that go nowhere. Rather than ask where we began, the Buddha urged us to ask, what is happening right now? What is it that keeps recreating this self over and over? How can I break free from it? Because in the end, understanding why we suffer and how to stop suffering is far more liberating than understanding where we started. Think of it this way. If you're trapped in a burning house, do you need to know who built it, or do you need to know how to get out? The Buddha wasn't interested in theories that didn't lead to awakening. He was interested in freedom, in transformation, in turning the gaze inward. But let's return to the question, because it's still calling to us, not as a riddle to solve, but as a path to walk. In many traditions, the answer to where did we come from varies. Christianity speaks of a soul created by God. Hinduism and Buddhism describe reincarnation, a stream of consciousness flowing through many lifetimes. Indigenous traditions often speak of ancestral spirits and sacred origins tied to the land. And yet, across all these stories, one theme remains constant. We are more than just this moment, this name, this life. Buddhism adds a unique voice to this chorus. It teaches that we are not static beings with fixed identities, but dynamic processes, like
a flame passed from candle to candle. Each life lights the next, shaped by karma, memory, and intention. And this brings up a profound realization. If we're part of a beginningless chain of lives, then perhaps this isn't our first heartbreak. Perhaps it's not our first triumph. Maybe the deep compassion you feel, or the inexplicable fear, or that moment of déjà vu you couldn't explain, maybe these are echoes from another time, another you. So what does this all mean for your life now? It means your story is bigger than you think. You are not just the product of your childhood or your DNA. You are not just John from Ohio or Lisa from Chicago. You are a river of experience flowing through time, shaped by choices, some remembered, some forgotten. And that changes everything. Because if we've lived before, we've likely loved before. We've likely hurt and healed, lost and found, fallen and risen again and again. And that means we'll do it again. But next time, maybe a little more awake. So today, I invite you to hold that question gently. Who was I before I was born? Not to demand an answer, but to let it open something soft in you, a doorway to curiosity, to reverence, to reflection. Maybe the question itself is the answer. Maybe it's not about where you came from, but about what you're becoming. If this sparked something in you, stay with us, because in the next part, we'll explore actual evidence for past lives, from the Buddha's own recollections to modern-day children remembering lives they've never lived. This journey has only just begun.
Chapter 1. Where do we really come from? Exploring ancient beliefs and the Buddhist view. Have you ever sat quietly, perhaps during a sleepless night or a walk under the stars, and asked yourself, where did I come from? Not your job, not your family tree, not even your childhood, but something deeper, the very core of your being, the you that existed before the labels, the memories, the habits. Who were you before you were born? This isn't just a passing curiosity. It's one of the oldest questions human beings have ever asked. And for many of us, it still lives quietly inside, like a gentle ache or an ancient memory we can't quite name. All over the world, cultures and belief systems have offered their own answers to this mystery. Each one a different lens, a different doorway into the unknown. In Christianity, for example, it's often believed that the soul is created by God at the moment of conception. A single life, divinely formed, with a beginning and an end. In Hinduism, the view stretches across lifetimes. The Atman, the eternal self, moves from one body to the next, shaped by karma, until it merges back into the divine source. Buddhism also speaks of rebirth, but in a way that is surprisingly subtle. It doesn't propose an eternal soul or a fixed essence traveling through time. Instead, it describes a continuous stream of consciousness, like a flame passing from one candle to another, never quite the same, yet clearly connected. And then there are the indigenous traditions. Many Aboriginal Australians believe in a sacred concept called the Dreamtime, where life originates from ancestral spirits who continue to guide the land and its people. Before you are born, you are one of these spirits, and when you die, you return to that sacred realm. In Tibetan culture, some lamas are recognized as reincarnations of previous masters. Children, barely old enough to speak, are tested and sometimes confirmed as the next embodiment of someone long past. It's a striking reminder of how deeply rooted and widely accepted the idea of continuity has been across the globe. So what does this tell us? That this question, where do we come from, isn't a niche curiosity. It's a universal longing. It's not limited to monks or mystics. It lives in the hearts of ordinary people, in their quiet moments, their grief, their awe, their dreams. And yet, even with all these answers, the Buddha did something unusual. When he was asked about the very beginning, the first cause, the origin of all things, he often stayed silent. Not because he didn't know, but because he understood something that most of us overlook. That some questions, as beautiful as they are, can become traps. He once compared it to asking, "What's north of the North Pole?" It sounds like a reasonable question, but it's based on the wrong framework. It assumes a fixed structure in a fluid reality. Buddhism doesn't spend energy trying to pinpoint a starting point of the universe or the soul, because doing so can become a distraction from the more urgent truth. We are suffering, and we need to understand why. The Buddha didn't come to answer every cosmic mystery. He came to teach liberation, to show us how to wake up from suffering and confusion right here in this life. That's why he often redirected people's attention away from abstract beginnings and toward what can actually be known, observed, and transformed: craving, ignorance, and the path to freedom. Imagine this. You're trapped in a burning house. Smoke is everywhere. The walls are closing in. In that moment, would you ask, "Who built this house?" Or would you ask, "How do I get out?" That's the spirit of the Buddha's silence. He didn't want us to spend our lives debating the blueprints of a prison. He wanted us to find the door. But that doesn't mean we should dismiss the question altogether. In fact, when approached with awareness and humility, it becomes a kind of spiritual mirror. Where do I come from? It leads us to ask deeper questions. Why am I drawn to certain people, places, or cultures? Why do I carry fears that seem older than this life? Could my struggles and even my gifts be shaped by something beyond my memory? In meditation, some people experience glimpses, not visions or fantasies, but subtle feelings, like memories from another time. A face that seems familiar, a city you've never been to, yet dream about often. These moments don't prove anything in the scientific sense, but they open a door to a deeper possibility. And maybe that's the point. Buddhism doesn't ask us to believe blindly in rebirth or past lives. It simply invites us to explore experience, to stay curious, to notice what arises when we listen deeply to our own consciousness. The Buddha once said that his teachings are like the ocean. They don't drop you suddenly into deep water. They begin gently, like the shore, and as you go deeper, they reveal more and more. In other words, you don't need to understand everything all at once. Truth unfolds, like breath, like sunrise, like a blooming flower. So rather than racing to answer where did it all begin, perhaps we can rest in the mystery a little longer. Instead of demanding certainty, we can allow the question to soften us, to humble us, to open our hearts. Because maybe the more important question is this: what am I doing with this life I've been given? Whether you believe in one life or many, this moment is still sacred. And perhaps, just perhaps, you've been here before. So, what will you do differently this time? In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when people do remember their past lives. From ancient accounts to modern science, stories of children, researchers, and even the Buddha himself. Could your story be longer than you ever imagined? Stay with us, because the journey inward is only just beginning. Chapter 2. What if past lives were real? Exploring stories, science, and memory beyond birth. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever walked into a place you've never been and suddenly felt like you knew it? Or met someone for the first time, but something in your heart whispered, "We've met before"? These moments are often brushed off as coincidences. But what if they're not? What if they're not? What if they're echoes, tiny ripples from a life you once lived long before this one began? In Buddhist tradition, the idea of past lives isn't just poetic, it's foundational. It's how the Buddha himself awakened. On the night of his enlightenment, as he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, his mind entered a profound stillness. And in that clarity, something extraordinary happened. He began to remember, not just one life, not a dream, but a vast, unending stream of existences. He described it like this: I recalled my many former births, 1 birth, 2 births, 3 births, 4 births, countless eons of world expansion and contraction. He saw who he had been, what families he was born into, the joys and sorrows he had experienced. He remembered details, names, places, meals, even the causes of his deaths. These weren't vague impressions, they were memories, sharp, clear, and undeniable. For the Buddha, this wasn't just an insight, it was a revelation that reshaped everything. He realized that life wasn't a one-time event. It was a continuum, interconnected, flowing, shaped by karma and intention. And this understanding deepened his compassion, because he had been many people. He had suffered in countless ways. He had struggled, just like us. That's why his teachings are so rooted in empathy. He wasn't speaking from theory. He had lived it, again and again. Now, maybe you're thinking, sure, but that's the Buddha. He was special, enlightened, divine in some way. Fair enough. But what if I told you that ordinary people, especially young children, have reported similar experiences? Not just in ancient texts, not just in religious contexts, but in modern, well-documented research. Let me introduce you to the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. For over 50 years, researchers there, most notably Dr. Ian Stevenson and later Dr. Jim Tucker, have investigated reports of children who claim to remember past lives. They've collected over 2,500 cases from around the world. And here's the fascinating part. Most of these children are between 2 and 6 years old, an age where imagination is vivid, yes, but also before most children have been deeply conditioned by culture or education. These kids don't just say strange things, they often share extremely specific details about lives they could not possibly know about. Things like names of people they claim to have been, towns or villages they've never visited but can describe, details about their previous family, even how they died, and sometimes even knowledge of languages or skills they've never been exposed to. Let me share a real example. Shanti Devi, a young girl in India in the 1930s, began speaking at age 4 about her previous life in a town called Mathura. She said her name had been Lugdi Devi and she had died shortly after giving birth. She insisted she had a husband named Kedar Nath and described his house in vivid detail. Eventually, her family contacted a man by that name in Mathura. Not only did he exist, he confirmed that his late wife had indeed died after childbirth, and the details Shanti gave were shockingly accurate. She recognized Kedar Nath instantly. She even knew personal things about their home that no outsider could have known. This case was so compelling that Mahatma Gandhi himself had it investigated. Now, skeptics have valid concerns. Could this be coincidence, fantasy, or maybe suggestions from adults? Researchers at UVA take those questions seriously. That's why their process is methodical and cautious. They often interview multiple people, verify timelines, and look for natural explanations before even considering a past life hypothesis. And while not every case is airtight, many are difficult to dismiss. Here's where it gets even stranger. In some cases, children not only remember details, but they carry fears, phobias, or personality traits that align with their claimed past.
For example, a child terrified of drowning might recall having died in water. Another child might be drawn to a specific profession or culture they've never been exposed to. There are even documented instances of children speaking a foreign language they were never taught, fluently enough to hold conversation. And in a few cases, they've led researchers to places, homes, or graves they had never physically visited, yet described in exact detail. Of course, we can't prove all of this with microscopes and lab tests, but when taken together, these stories suggest something worth pausing for. What if memory isn't just stored in the brain? What if consciousness or a stream of awareness stretches beyond this single life?
Have you ever experienced déjà vu? That strange, fleeting sense that you've been here before, said this exact thing, walked this exact street? Or maybe you've had a dream so vivid, so haunting, it felt like a memory. Or an instant connection to someone that felt older than time. In Buddhism, these are sometimes seen as the whispers of past lives, traces from journeys long forgotten but not entirely erased. You don't need to believe in reincarnation to appreciate the mystery. Even modern neuroscience can't fully explain consciousness, memory, or why we sometimes know things without learning them. And while Western science focuses mostly on what can be measured, Buddhism invites us to also pay attention to what can be experienced, to listen inward, to observe the mind, to notice patterns that arise again and again. Because even if we don't remember our past lives, they may still be shaping us. So here's a question for you. What if your deepest fear, or your strongest talent, or your unexplained attraction to a place, a culture, or a time period isn't random? What if it's a thread connecting you to a story you've lived before? In the end, Buddhism doesn't demand belief. It encourages curiosity. It says, try it, see for yourself. And if nothing else, maybe these stories remind us that life is far more mysterious and far more interconnected than we usually admit. Maybe you're not just living this life. Maybe you're continuing one. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this stream of consciousness, this mind that continues, moves between lives. How does rebirth actually happen in Buddhist thought? What carries forward if there's no permanent soul? It's a fascinating paradox and one worth exploring together. So take a breath and stay with us, because the journey inward is just beginning. Chapter 3: How Consciousness Moves from Life to Life, the Buddhist View of Rebirth. Take a moment and imagine your mind as a river. Not a still pond, not something fixed in place, but a flowing, ever-changing current, sometimes gentle, sometimes wild, but always moving. Now imagine this river doesn't begin at birth and doesn't end at death. It just continues. That's how Buddhism sees consciousness, not as a solid thing, not as a soul trapped in a body, but as a process, a stream, a movement, shaped by conditions, shaped by karma, shaped by experience. Your mind today isn't the same as it was 5 years ago, or even 5 minutes ago. Thoughts rise and fall, emotions shift. You learn, forget, grow, change. But something connects each moment to the next. That's the mind stream. And it's this stream that continues, even after death. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Buddhism teaches that there is no permanent, unchanging self, no eternal you traveling through lifetimes. That might sound strange at first, because most of us feel like we are someone consistent. But look closer. Are you the same person you were at age 10? Same dreams, same fears, same body? Cells die and regenerate, memories shift, identity evolves. Yet there's a kind of thread that connects all the versions of you that have come and gone. That thread in Buddhist thought is not a soul, but a stream of causes and conditions, not a static entity, but a dynamic unfolding. To make sense of this, the Buddha offered metaphors. One of the most powerful is fire. A flame doesn't exist independently. It needs fuel. Change the fuel, wood, oil, gas, and the flame changes. No fuel, no fire. Similarly, consciousness arises depending on conditions. When the body dies, the conditions change. But just like lighting one candle from another, a new life can be ignited without transferring anything fixed. There's continuity, but not permanence. So what happens when we die? According to Buddhist teachings, the physical body begins to dissolve. This process is described through the 4 elements. Earth dissolves. We feel heavy, disconnected from form. Water dissolves, fluids dry, sensations blur. Fire dissolves, warmth fades, clarity dims. Air dissolves, the breath stops, the body stills. This isn't just poetic. It's a deep meditative observation found especially in Tibetan Buddhism, where the dying process has been studied in incredible detail. But here's the part many find fascinating. Consciousness doesn't stop. The stream doesn't dry up. Instead, it enters a transitional state known as the bardo. The word bardo means in between. It's not life, and it's not yet the next rebirth. It's a space between worlds, like a dream between dreams. In the bardo, something remarkable happens. Your mind becomes 7 times more clear than during life, but also 7 times more sensitive. Why? Because there's no physical body to dull your awareness. No distractions, no defenses, no filters. Your pure consciousness, wide open, exposed to the full weight of your own karma. Your intentions, habits, and emotions rise like visions. And in this vulnerable clarity, you are drawn magnetically toward your next life.
Now pause and consider this. If your mind is crystal clear, but also easily influenced, what determines what happens next? According to Buddhism, it's your final thought before death that holds enormous power. Think of it like the final current in a river before it pours into the sea. If that thought is filled with fear, anger, or attachment, it can shape your next birth in a painful way. But if it's peaceful, loving, or wise, it can carry you to a better state. That's why in Tibetan tradition, so much care is given to the dying process. Teachers recite prayers. Loved ones speak gently. Guides whisper instructions for navigating the bardo, like a lighthouse guiding a ship through fog. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, one of the most revered texts, offers precise details about what unfolds in these moments. It says that in the bardo, you may encounter dazzling lights, powerful emotions, or even beings of light and shadow, all manifestations of your own consciousness. If you recognize them as such, you can move toward liberation. If you cling, fear, or identify with them, you may be pulled back into the cycle of rebirth. Now, you might wonder, is this symbolic or literal? That depends on how you look at it. Some people believe the bardo is a real dimension. Others see it as a metaphor for the psychological process of dying. But either way, the takeaway is clear. Death is not the end. It's a passage. And how we die, what's in our mind and heart at that moment, matters deeply. This isn't meant to scare us. It's meant to awaken us. Because if the mind continues beyond the body, then how we train the mind now shapes not just this life, but what comes after. Our daily thoughts, our habits of attention, our reactions, our intentions, our beliefs, they are the fuel for our inner fire. And when the time comes, it will be those flames that light the way forward. Think of your life like a lantern. Every moment you're adding oil to the flame. You're choosing kindness or anger, fear or courage, clarity or confusion. And when the wind of death blows, what kind of flame will you carry into the dark? This teaching isn't abstract philosophy, it's a mirror. It invites us to ask right now, what thoughts am I rehearsing daily? What habits am I strengthening? What kind of energy am I cultivating? Because these, not our possessions or status, are what follow us. And here's the beauty. It means we have agency. Right now, in this breath, you can plant seeds of peace. You can shape your mind stream with wisdom. You can prepare, not for death as an end, but for it as a graceful continuation, a return to the flow. In the next chapter, we'll explore what actually guides this flow, the invisible forces that shape your next life, and how karma is far more than reward and punishment. It's not fate, it's not superstition, it's cause and effect. And understanding it deeply can transform how you live and how you let go. So stay with us, because the stream doesn't stop here, and neither do you.
Chapter 4. Karma, the invisible compass guiding rebirth. Pause for a moment and think about this. Every thought you've ever had, every word you've ever spoken, every choice you've ever made, they didn't just disappear. They went somewhere, left an imprint. And according to Buddhist thought, those imprints shape not only who you are today, but where you go next. This is the teaching of karma. Now, let's clear something up from the start. Karma is not punishment. It's not fate. And it's definitely not some cosmic judge keeping score. Karma simply means intentional action, what we think, say, and do, and the ripple effect those actions create. It's like tossing a pebble into a still pond. The pebble disappears beneath the surface, but the ripples continue. Sometimes they reach the shore in seconds. Other times they drift quietly, only to rise much later, maybe even in another life. Every action, especially when done with intention, plants a seed in our consciousness. This seed doesn't vanish. It rests quietly in the soil of the mind stream, waiting for the right conditions to ripen. This is how karma works. It's not about judgment. It's about cause and effect. You plant generosity, and in time you experience abundance. You plant cruelty, and you meet its reflection, perhaps not instantly, but inevitably. The Buddha put it this way: I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. In other words, you don't inherit your fate from the stars or the gods or your ancestors. You inherit it from yourself, from your habits, your choices, your intentions, moment by moment. Now, here's where karma and rebirth meet. When this life ends and the body fades away, the mind continues, carrying with it a backpack of karmic seeds. But where do these seeds land? What determines where we're reborn? According to Buddhist teachings, 3 conditions must come together for rebirth to happen: the union of the parents, a mother's body that is fertile and receptive, and the presence of what's called a gandhabba, a consciousness stream ready to take birth. The gandhabba isn't a soul. It's not a little ghost floating in the sky. It's the subtle energy of mind, carrying the karmic tendencies from a previous life, drawn, like a magnet, toward a life that matches its nature. Think of it like this. If you've lived a life driven by fear, anger, or greed, your consciousness might naturally gravitate toward an environment that mirrors those qualities, perhaps a place of conflict or hardship. But if you've cultivated generosity, patience, and compassion, you may find yourself drawn into a family, culture, or body that supports those seeds and helps them bloom. This isn't reward or punishment. It's resonance. Like attracts like. Our inner world seeks out a matching outer world.
Let's look at a few examples. Someone who lives with deep selfishness may be born into conditions of lack or isolation, not as a penalty, but as a mirror. A person who develops kindness and generosity might find themselves reborn into supportive environments, again, not as a prize, but as natural consequence. This isn't about wealth or poverty, pain or pleasure. It's about the lessons our consciousness is still learning, the karmic patterns still unfolding. This teaching is beautifully laid out in a Buddhist text called the Kula Kamavibhanga Sutta, where the Buddha explains to a young man why people are born into different conditions. He says, "Those who kill or harm others are often born into shorter lives. Those who give life, protect, and care are often born into longer lives. People who are generous tend to experience abundance in future lives. Those who are angry or cruel may take birth with less favorable physical appearances. People who practice patience and forgiveness often carry a kind of inner and outer beauty. But, and this is important, karma is not fixed.
It's not a prison. Your past may influence your present, but it doesn't define your future. Because at every moment, you're planting new seeds. You may carry the momentum of old habits, but you also carry the power to choose. Right now, you can interrupt patterns. You can create new ones. You can shape the next chapter, not just of this life, but of the next. Think of a mountain trail. Some parts are rocky and steep because of choices made long ago, but you're still walking, and you can still turn, pause, breathe, change direction. That's the beauty of karma. It gives us responsibility, yes, but it also gives us freedom. Let me ask you something personal. What kind of seeds are you planting today? In the way you speak to others? In how you spend your time when no one is watching? In how you treat those who challenge you? In how you respond to suffering, yours and others? These moments matter more than we often realize. Because karma isn't stored in the past, it's alive in the present, it's created now. One of the most liberating teachings in Buddhism is this: no matter what karma brought you to this moment, you can still influence what comes next. A single act of kindness can ripple far into the future. A shift in awareness can redirect lifetimes. And when death comes, as it will for all of us, the mind that leaves this body will carry the energy we've cultivated, not our possessions, not our titles, not even our memories, but our habits, our intentions, our heart. So, if karma is the compass that guides rebirth, then let your compass be steady. Let it be kind. Let it point not just toward another life, but toward a better one shaped by clarity, compassion, and wisdom. In our next chapter, we'll go deeper into the most paradoxical and profound of all Buddhist teachings: no self. If there's no permanent me, then what exactly is being reborn? How can something continue if there's no one there? It's a mystery at the very heart of Buddhism, and it just might change the way you understand yourself forever. So breathe deeply and stay with us. The journey is unfolding. Chapter 5. The No-Self Paradox. Who are you, really? Take a handful of sand. Hold it in your palm. Feel its texture. Each grain feels solid, right? But the handful itself, can you really point to where it is? If you open your hand, it slips away, and what you thought was a thing reveals itself as just a collection, a temporary gathering of countless pieces, coming together for a moment and then falling apart. That's how Buddhism asks us to look at the self. Not to deny our existence, but to see through the illusion of something fixed, unchanging, and independent. This teaching is called anatta, or no-self, and it may be one of the most misunderstood and yet most liberating ideas in all of Buddhism. Now, you might be thinking, but I do exist. I have a name, a face, a story. I remember my past. I know what I like, what I fear. And all of that is true, but only at one level. Buddhism distinguishes between conventional truth and ultimate truth. Conventional truth is the world we live in every day. You have a job title, a driver's license, a personal history. You say things like, "This is my body," or "That's my opinion." And that's fine, that's functional. We need that to navigate life. But ultimate truth asks a deeper question. Is there a single, unchanging core beneath all those layers? Something you can point to and say, this is who I really am. When we look closely, we don't find that. We find a process, not a person. Imagine taking apart a car, piece by piece. You remove the wheels, the engine, the seats, the steering wheel. At some point, you realize there's no part called car. Car was just a label we gave to a collection of parts arranged in a certain way. The same is true of you. According to Buddhism, what we call a self is just the temporary coming together of 5 aggregates: form, rupa, your physical body; feeling, vedana, The sensations, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, that you experience. Perception, sanya, how your mind labels and interprets what it sees. Mental formations, sankhara, thoughts, emotions, habits, intentions. Consciousness, vijnana, the awareness that knows experience is happening. These 5 are always changing, moment by moment. There's no solid me in them, just movement, just pattern, just flow. Let's take another example, one you might remember from ancient philosophy. The ship of Theseus. Imagine a ship made of wooden planks. Over time, each plank is replaced, one by one. Eventually, not a single original piece remains. Is it still the same ship? Most would say yes, but also no. There's continuity, but no unchanging core. That's exactly how the self works in Buddhist thought. Even science echoes this.
Your body replaces most of its cells every 7 to 10 years. Your memories shift. Your personality evolves. You're constantly updating, yet still feel like a single you. But from a deeper perspective, you're more like a verb than a noun, more process than product, more flame than statue. And speaking of flame, the Buddha used another metaphor. He said the mind stream is like one candle lighting another. The second flame isn't identical to the first, but it also isn't unrelated. There's continuity without sameness. That's how rebirth works in Buddhism. Not a soul jumping from one body to the next, but a pattern of causes and conditions unfolding over time. Just like a wave rolling across the sea, no part of it is fixed, but its motion continues. Now let's pause here, because you might wonder, if there's no permanent self, what's the point of it all? Who's doing the learning, the suffering, the loving? That's the paradox. There is a you, but it's not what you think. You exist conventionally, functionally. You feel pain, joy, loss, connection. You grow, you remember. But ultimately, what you are is a collection of conditions, always in flux. Just like the sand in your palm. Beautiful, tangible, but not fixed. So what does this mean for your life? It means you don't have to cling so tightly to the past, to a fixed identity, to the belief that you are only your mistakes or only your successes. It means you're not trapped in who you were yesterday. Because that version of you, it's already changing. Right now, with every breath, every thought, every choice. And this insight, far from making life meaningless, actually makes it more sacred. Because if everything is impermanent, then every moment matters. Every connection is precious. Every act of kindness ripples farther than we can see. You don't have to protect a fragile ego. You don't have to prove your worth. You just have to be present, aware of the movement, the flow, the miracle of this ever-changing life. The teaching of no self doesn't deny your existence. It redefines it. It shifts your identity from I am this thing to I am this unfolding. And that unfolding is free. Free to grow, free to forgive, free to let go of labels that never truly fit. So let me ask you, what parts of yourself have you been holding too tightly? What old stories about who you are could you gently set down? What if you're not broken, just becoming? What if healing isn't about returning to a solid you, but allowing yourself to flow into who you already are underneath it all? In a world that tells us to solidify, brand, and perfect ourselves, the Buddhist teaching of anatta is a radical act of compassion. It says, you are not your pain. You are not your pride. You are not even your name. You are movement. You are presence. You are the dance itself. In our next chapter, we'll explore how science, especially neuroscience and consciousness studies, is beginning to echo these ancient truths. Is the mind truly local to the brain? Or is it something far more mysterious? Modern research is catching up with ancient insight, and the conversation is just getting started. So stay with us, because the more we let go of what we think we are,
the closer we come to what we've always been.
Chapter 6. When Science Meets Ancient Wisdom, the Mystery of Consciousness. Take a deep breath and ask yourself this. What is it that's aware of this moment? The part of you that's listening right now. Not your ears, not your brain, but that quiet sense of, I'm here. What is that? Where does consciousness actually come from? Is it just the brain firing neurons? Or is there something more? This question, the one you just asked in silence, is one of the greatest puzzles of modern science. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. The challenge is this. How do physical things, like atoms and cells, give rise to something so non-physical, like thoughts, emotions, memory, the taste of chocolate, or the feeling of love? Science can map brain activity. It can even tell us what part lights up when we feel fear, or joy, or see the color red. But it still can't answer one simple question. Why does experience feel like anything at all? For thousands of years, Buddhism has approached this mystery from the inside out. Instead of asking, how does the brain produce consciousness? It asks, what if consciousness isn't something the brain produces, but something the brain arises within? In other words, what if the mind isn't trapped inside the brain, but the brain exists within the field of mind? It's a subtle but powerful shift, one that modern science is just beginning to explore. Let me tell you about something truly strange. It's called terminal lucidity. There are documented cases of people with severe brain damage, people who had lost all memory, language, or cognition, suddenly becoming completely clear and aware just before death. For a few hours, sometimes even just minutes, they speak coherently. They recognize loved ones. They smile, and then they pass away. How can this happen? Their brains were medically incapable of that kind of clarity. But somehow, consciousness returned, even briefly. Cases like these make some scientists wonder, could the brain be more like a filter than a source? Like a radio tuning in to a larger signal? When the filter breaks down, the full signal briefly shines through. Now, let's take it further. There have been cases of heart transplant recipients who suddenly developed new tastes, behaviors, or memories, often eerily aligned with those of the donor. One woman who hated green peppers and beer suddenly craved both after surgery. Later, she found out her donor had loved them. Another recipient began having dreams and emotions she couldn't explain, until she met the donor's family, who confirmed the connection. These cases are still debated. They're rare, but they invite a haunting question. Are memories and identity only stored in the brain? Or could consciousness, like energy, be more distributed, more mysterious than we think? Now, let's turn inward. You don't need to wait for a transplant or a medical mystery to explore consciousness. You can train your own mind. And that's exactly what Buddhist meditation practices are designed to do. Modern neuroscience is now catching up with what monks and meditators have practiced for centuries. In recent decades, scientists have put seasoned meditators like Matthew Ricard and Yangye Mingyu Rinpoche into brain scanners to see what happens during deep meditation. What they found was astonishing. Regular meditation increases gray matter in areas related to emotional regulation, focus, and empathy. Strengthens neural pathways associated with compassion. Reduces reactivity in the amygdala, the part of the brain tied to fear and stress. Enhances activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area involved in wisdom, decision-making, and long-term thinking. In short, meditation doesn't just calm you down, it reshapes your brain. And the most powerful thing? These changes aren't limited to monks in caves. Even 8 weeks of daily mindfulness practice, just 10 to 20 minutes a day, has been shown to create noticeable changes in brain function and structure. That means that how you breathe, how you pay attention, how you relate to the present moment, literally shapes your biology. The practice doesn't just change your mind, it changes the vessel of your mind. So what does all this mean? It means the ancient Buddhist view that consciousness is fundamental, that mind shapes matter, that awareness is not a byproduct but a primary force, is not in conflict with science. In fact, it's starting to meet it halfway. We are watching a moment in history where ancient inner technologies, meditation, introspection, non-attachment, are now being explored using outer technologies, fMRI scans, EEG readings, behavioral data. And time again, the results say, this works, this matters, this rewires the brain. But even beyond the research, there's something more valuable, something beyond data. It's the experience you've had when time stops in a moment of awe, when you feel connected to everything, even if you can't explain why, when stillness opens up something inside you. That is consciousness. That is the wisdom every great tradition, scientific or spiritual, is trying to understand. So let's step back and ask, is the brain the source of your awareness or the lens through which you experience it? Is consciousness local to your skull or part of something wider, deeper, perhaps even timeless? These aren't questions to answer once and for all. They're questions to live with, to breathe with, to meditate with, to carry into the silence between moments. In the end, maybe science and spirituality aren't opposites. Maybe they're two ways of exploring the same mystery. Science through measurement, Buddhism through direct experience. And maybe the greatest truth is one that both sides agree on, that how you live shapes what you become, that awareness, compassion, and attention are not luxuries, but the very fabric of a meaningful life. In our next and final chapter, we'll reflect on how this knowledge of rebirth, karma, and the nature of the self can transform how we live now, not as a theory, but as a daily practice, as a way of walking through this life, awake, kind, and free. So stay with us. The journey is coming full circle. Chapter 7. Living with the Understanding of Rebirth. Take a slow, deep breath. Now imagine this life, not as a destination, not as a single story with a clear beginning and end, but as just one chapter in a much longer, unfolding book. A book you've been writing, consciously or unconsciously, across lifetimes. How would it change the way you live if you knew this wasn't the whole story? In Buddhist thought, rebirth isn't a punishment. It's not about coming back because you did something wrong. It's more like a continuation, a ripple in the stream of consciousness, shaped by the karma you've created. And understanding that, really understanding it, can shift everything. Because if this life is just a chapter, then death isn't the end. It's a scene change, a doorway, a breath between stories. And that shift, just that one insight, can soften so much fear. Most of us, deep down, carry some fear of death. Not just fear of pain, but fear of disappearing, of losing everything, of being nothing. But if rebirth is real, if consciousness continues, then death is not a full stop. It's a comma. And we start to live differently. Not out of fear of judgment, but out of trust in continuity. What if the struggles you're facing now, the heartbreak, the health challenge, the financial setback, aren't random? What if they're not punishments, but opportunities? Opportunities to burn off old karmic seeds, to learn what wasn't learned before, to grow in ways that past versions of you weren't yet ready for. Imagine this. The person who triggers you the most today might have been your child in a previous life, or your mother, or your sworn enemy. What would that realization stir in you? Would it open space for more patience, more forgiveness, maybe even love? The Buddha often reminded his followers, In this cycle of birth and death, there is no being you have not once called mother. Think about that. Every stranger, every difficult person, every face in the crowd, you've likely known them before. And suddenly, kindness doesn't feel optional, it feels natural. This is the quiet power of seeing life through the lens of rebirth. You realize you're not alone, you're not isolated, you're deeply, intricately connected to all living beings, through time, through space, through karma. And from that insight, compassion naturally grows. Now, the Buddha didn't just teach rebirth as a concept. He gave us daily practices to help us live with that wisdom. One of those practices is known as the 5 daily reflections. You don't need to be a monk to use them. They are for anyone, just like you and me, trying to live more consciously. Here they are. I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot escape aging. I am of the nature to become ill. I cannot avoid sickness. I am of the nature to die. I cannot avoid death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. I cannot avoid being separated from them. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions. My actions are the ground on which I stand. These reflections are not morbid. They're not meant to scare you. They're meant to wake you up, gently, to remind you of what truly matters, to ground you in the only thing you really take with you from one life to the next, your karma. And that brings us to something beautiful, something empowering. You don't have to make huge changes to create positive karma. You don't need to renounce the world or become a saint overnight. You can begin right now in small, mindful ways. A kind word when you're frustrated, a pause before reacting, a meal shared in gratitude, a breath taken with full awareness. These tiny acts, done with intention, plant seeds. And just like seeds, they may grow slowly, but once they're planted, they live on. In this life, in the next, in the unseen ripples of the world around you. So maybe the question isn't, what will happen after I die? Maybe the better question is, what will continue after I live? What energy will I leave behind? What habits? What emotions? What kindness? You see, we're all walking through this life carrying an invisible bag of karma, both old and new. And with each step, we're adding to it. The beauty is, you can choose what goes in. So choose carefully. Choose with love. Choose with presence. Let me share something personal. There was a time in my life when I was afraid to slow down. I was afraid of silence, afraid of stillness, afraid of looking too deeply. But the moment I sat still long enough to face those fears, to feel the echoes of something older than memory, something shifted. I stopped trying to win life, and I started trying to live it well. Not perfectly, but sincerely. And that sincerity, I think, is enough. So I invite you to sit with this idea, not as belief, but as reflection. If this life is one chapter, how do you want to write it? Not in big, dramatic ways, but in the quiet, ordinary moments that no one sees. Because that's where karma is shaped. That's where future lives are planted. And that's where freedom begins. If you've made it to this point in the series, I want to thank you. Not just for watching, but for being present, for being curious, for being open to seeing life through a deeper, wiser lens. And if something in you feels a gentle yes, a subtle resonance, then I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe if you'd like to continue the journey with us. And if this series moved you, consider sharing it with someone who may be carrying quiet questions of their own. This path isn't about having all the answers. It's about walking together, aware, awake, and compassionate. We'll see you in the next reflection. Until then, may you walk gently, may you love deeply, and may you plant beautiful seeds wherever you go.